Okay, we now like to explore the basics of real property law. As I have introduced, the real property law in the common law countries is based on a judge-made law that has been stumbled with a myriad of various types. The intent of creator, in theory, can affect as it denotes, but could become uniform in its types through a deliberation of common law judges in 6 types. Still, it is complicated to ascertain its operation on many of practical aspects. In the evolution of a property law, we need to revert to the high role of Court of Chancery that is considered as one of 2 pillars to sustain the British judicial system along with the common law court. The court, under the entire status representing the justice of king, had a final say about the potential iniquity brought from the technicalities of common law. Later, we see some of rules developed by Court of Chancery. Another point you need to be aware of is there is no comprehensive scheme of statute dealing with the real property as distinct from the laws of the European continent. There are several statutes we can find to serve the legal interest in this area of law. The Statute of Uses, the Statute of Frauds, and the 1845 English Act concerning the forms and disposition of deed can be illustrated. One other important statute would be a recording statute that all states in the United States are now enforcing in the respective jurisdiction. But they are not exhaustive to cover all the potential problems arising from legal relationship which matters with the ownership of land. Of course, the statute was raised to cure most of the fundamentals necessary to address the problems in centralization. And that is our notion that can be seen as a divisive line between the civil and common law traditions. Detoured from our topic, how do you agree if that kind of decentralized tradition is favored in the Korean context? For the class purpose as well as the ongoing move toward the better political system in Korea, I'd like to introduce contrast between centralization versus decentralization. Let me begin with 4 pictures for illustration. The first picture, as you see in the visual aid, shows the chair of a monarch. Chair of monarch. The chair is called the round table. The third picture exposes the endeavor of concerned intellectuals to voice a democratic wills of South Korea. They stress for the 2 opposing candidates, Moon and An, to unite for one representation in order to effectively rival with the most presidential hopeful Kuneba. And the last picture is related with the reform agenda to the decentralized mode of presidential system led by J.O. Lee, who was once in power and long bore an impression of modest conservative in South Korea. Historically, the monarchy between England England and France can be seen more as a different each other. The King of England can be considered to share his power with his noble powers. That tradition is now left as you look into the parliamentary system of Great Britain. While the French monarchy took on the form of more absolute nature, it was abolished at once for democracy. In contrast, the King of England still be a political center, symbolic though, sharing his prestige with his noble powers. Through the preceding government, it was long asserted to ensure local autonomy in the administration of Korea, as you could find in the legacy of Tae-jung Kim's leadership. Do you prefer that scheme? If to yield more efficiency in administration, or like to see more uniformity on centralized control? We have experienced the recurrence of expert opinions in proposing a parliamentary system to counterpose the evils of an abridged power of president. Do you agree that the power has to be shared by president, prime minister, and some of local elects importance as way of analogy? That arrangement can be understood in some sense from the viewpoint of a decentralization tradition in Britain. Do you know the tradition of gentry, which brought out common sense of British gentlemanship? Also, it seems to be interesting to see that in Korea, a concerned group of critics used the name of night conference of round table to voice their political opinion, as we saw in the previous picture. This tradition takes a distinctive flavor to operate a public mission from the bottom up, doesn't it? Although we speak about the democratic form of government, some commentator knows a critical role of noble class in the contemporary society. You could well hear of the word noblesse oblige. How much do you think is essential to move forward the Korean society? One other point of consideration has to be made to prevent from the potential abuse of power if we were to patronize the British parliamentary system in our constitutional adventure. As you know, the President of the United States was once attributed as monarch by Rosenstein, a German constitutional scholar, in its Nature of Constitutional Power Structure. But we are not afraid of his arbitrariness in the exercise of a constitutional power because the U.S. Constitution was safely instituted on separation of powers principle, what we call tripartite government, and its consequence for check and balance among the powers. As you see, the French form of government is normally considered as most centralized one, that the power president is relatively supportive against the two others, as suggested in Montesquieuan concepts. That was once emphasized and actually imposed, though not in exact nature, in the Fifth Republic of South Korea. Later, we moderated the presidential power to restore a conformity with a separationist scheme. What do you think is a principal force to bring the debate of a constitutional reform while pointing to the imperialistic nature of presidential power in recent Korea? Personally, do you like to see some of latter in the society as an intermediate nature between the state and people at large in order to vibrate our society? how do you perceive the proposition of noblesse suffrage and the laws of Britain in power symbolically, but not in power in practical terms? Can it be deemed constitutional if I am proactive to restore the regime of dynasty in Korea? Okay, reverting to our topic, the House of Lords in Britain have long struggled with the feudal heritage of nobility impacting the structure of ownership. Some of the essentials to be noted are its nature of high subjectivity. The intent of creator of interest in land is normally governing, controlling, and entails the nature of subjectivity in contrast to the objective nature of a prescribed code. In theory and practice, the kind of real property rights are limited on statutory ground, the ownership in the whole of title, easement, leasehold, and mortgage right. One other distinct concept is the possession of possessory interest to relate the right of law to the fact in actuality. But as we will review, the kind of ownership about the land in common law are divergent to sustain the need of a feudal system. It is in sharp contrast with the statutory marshalling from the states of the European continent that the creator's rules dealing with the interest of land is controlling and definite. That implies, in analogy, that the king and noble class are an equivalent of state and statutes in comparative sense. And what is important to note is the whole scope of covenant expressed in the deed is effective and has qualification to be recorded in the recording statute in all states. Therefore, you can properly figure in the last scene of round table versus a sole chair of monarch to understand the context of real property system in both legal traditions. Another point in consideration is the intertwining speculation of a real property law with wills and estate. In order to define through the interests of creator, the divergence normally has been brought as relating with the law of succession. One unitary line of law on succession from the continental Europe can also be distinguished from these complexities. The final point I like to say is that the terms used to denote the property right could be simply affronting to the civil law students. When we learn the property law, we normally suppose that it is one of symbolic creatures to represent the capitalistic society in combination with the freedom of contract. And we use the word title of land, ownership, or right of real property like in this class. There are no other words in the civil law system besides these. And the property right is normally understood to benefit the owner. But in this class ahead, you can count on us many words, beginning with fee or estate. The word fee could be accepted to approximate the tax concept in contemporary context. So you can be minded that the way of approach in the common law seems to quite opposite to the continental Europe, which would be caused from the feudal structure of land ownership. And the word estate can be close to the concept of ownership. It is also partial, however, to designate the permanent nature of ownership. That also implies that the title of land is finally determinable to revert to the sovereign being. That will be king of state in some cases, or could be the sovereign state in other cases. It is also noteworthy that one kind of real property distinct from the civil law system is a life estate, as we learn in later class. Besides the intermediate concept in creating the interest in land and its intertwining nature, we can be easy on analogy to understand the real property law of common law system. Some more points need to be addressed. One of central concepts to substantiate the common law real property is cession, which is close to the concept of a possessory interest in civil laws. And it is not surprising to have the library of cession as one of the requirements to acquire or convey the land. That needs to be distinguished from the other two representative systems of France and Germany. It has long been observed, but was abolished far later, about a century ago. The second point is that the deed is placed also as central and defines the nature of property and its transfer. Its delivery constitutes an essential component to effect the transfer, which differs from the legal system of civil law country. The final contrast can be made to the recording statute. The recording statute in United States just operates in terms of priority in title of land, not an element to complete the transfer of real property. Without recording, the delivery of deed alone is sufficient for the transfer of land. Later, we will review the typical recording statute in ordering the priority of competing interests, which include race statute, a notice statute, and race notice statute. In 1066, William the Conqueror imposed on England a feudal system, and it is from this system that the law of real property developed, as I've introduced in previous class. The key features of feudal system are briefly explained. First, let's see the feudal letter. William, claiming all England as his own, passed out great tracts of land to chief supporters who became William's tenants-in-chief. In exchange for land, each tenant-in-chief agreed to render the king specified services, such as providing 40 knights each year to fight for the king. The services provided the king with military and economic support to govern England. Each tenant-in-chief, holding an immense acreage, parceled out portions of the land to subtenants, extracting a promise to render services from each subtenant. The subtenant in turn might infeudate to another tenant, extracting services from him. In this way, a feudal ladder was built up with the possessor of land at the bottom and the lords above him entitled to various services. Under the feudal system, each man except the king was made inferior to someone else. Each tenant was the vassal of some lord, and all were under the king as sovereign lord. Each tenant swore an oath of loyalty to his lord, an oath which made the tenant the lord of man, and bound the parties together for life. The process of creating another rung in the feudal ladder below the particular tenant was called sub-infeudation. Any tenant had the right to sub-infeudate, creating a vassal beneath him. When he did so, he became a master lord, meaning he had a lord above him and a tenant below him. A tenant who did not want to remain in the feudal ladder could substitute another tenant in his place with his lord's consent. In analysis, there are two keywords, including feudal services and feudal incidents. Services reserved by sub-infeudation were the feudal equivalent of taxes. As history would have it, the man at the bottom of the feudal ladder, the man in possession, was in the best position. Possession, which rose in value with inflation, maintained its value while the value of services declined. Inflation was a wealth redistribution effect favorable to the possessor and unfavorable to owners of fixed obligations. And feudal incidents were a form of taxes. They fell due on a number of occasions, but principally when the tenant died. The great difference between services and incidents was the services were fixed rents, but when incidents fell due, the lord got possession of the land back. With inflation, services grew less and less valuable, while possession kept pace with inflation. Hence, the lords jealously regarded the incidents, while letting service fall into ceremonial payments. The feudal instance included escheat, forfeiture, worship, and marriage, devaluation by sub-infeudation. If a tenant died without heirs, the tenant's position in the feudal ladder was eliminated, and possession of the land or whatever rights the tenant had reverted to the lord. If a tenant were convicted of breaching his oath of his lord or of a felony, he forfeited his tenure to his lord. The lord retook possession of the tenant's rights. These affected only minor heirs. If a tenant died leaving a minor heir, the lord was entitled to manage the tenant's lands for his own profit until the heir came of age and was entitled to sell the minor heir in marriage. So worship and marriage constitute one of the feudal incidents in this context. Sub-infeudation devalued these feudal incidents and was opposed by the top lords, who had all to gain by incidents imposed on tenants below. By interposing another tenant between the lord and the tenant in possession, when the incidents fell due, the lord did not get possession, but only the mezzanine lords rise against tenant in possession. In the context of a real property history, a statute, a Quia Emptors, enacted in 29/0, has much implications to shape the current form of a property law. To put a stop to sub-infeudation and to eliminate the creation of new mezzanine laws, the top lords at Parliament enact the statute Quia Emptors in 1290. This statute prohibited further sub-infeudation in fee simple. Afterwards, the network of tenures could only contract, not grow. The statute Quia Emptors established the principle the land should be freely alienable. Quia Emptors also provided that if a new tenant was substituted only with respect to a portion of the land, the feudal services were apportioned accordingly. The statute only forbade sub-infeudations in fee simple. It did not forbid the creation of new tenural relationship by granting estates less than a fee simple. English feudalism reached its peak in the 13th century, but the statute Quia Emptors marked the end. Feudalism went into gradual decline, but it has left its mark on modern law. Then, how this tradition evolved in the context of the United States? A basic principle of the feudal system of land tenure was that all land was held either directly or indirectly from the crown. In the United States, some states still follow the theory of tenure. The all land is held from the state, but this matters only in cases of escheat. If a person intestate and without heirs, his or her land escheats to the state where the land is located. The theory of escheat in the tenural system was that the lord had given the tenant a limited estate, one which expired when the tenant died without heirs. When the tenant died, the land reverted to the lord. If the tenural theory is followed today, escheat to the state takes place by way of a reversion to the state. In some states, the notion of tenure has been discarded, and land is owned allodially, that is, without any notion of holding from anyone, even the state. If a person died intestate without heirs, his land escheat to the state as an intestate a successor by virtue of a state statute, and not by any theory of reversion to the state. The basic distinction between the tenural and allodial theories of escheat is that under the tenural theory, land reverts or returns to the original owner, whereas under the allodial theory, land passes forward to a new owner. In the case titled In lieu O'Connor Estate, the Nebraska Code in 1934 held the local governmental entity may not require the state to pay inheritance taxes when an estate eschews to the state. Do you agree? According to the court opinion, the state is the original and ultimate proprietor of real estate. What is commonly termed ownership is really only a tenancy, which can continue only under legally recognized rights of tenure, transfer, and succession. Upon termination of this tenancy, the property reverts to the state. Thus, the term escheat means a reversion to the state. So there is a delicacy between the two theories, a title reverting versus a title passing. And that is also related with a basic conceptualization, how we perceive the nature of a property in the state. The conclusion of the trial court would have presumably been upheld if the court followed the allodial theory. Note that it only makes a difference if it is a subsidiary governmental entity which is levying the tax. We now articulate the system of estates. Let us see briefly its historic development. There are 6 types of estate that again can be classed in twofold, a freehold and non-freehold. One of feudalism developed the system of estates in land, which remains central to our modern law, both in theory and in practice. Although a person talks about owning property or land, what he holds legally is an estate in land. An estate is an interest in land, which is, or may become possessory, and is an interest measured by some period of time. In feudal days, a tenant was granted land by his lord for some period of time, to say for life, for 10 years, or for so long as he kept the bridges. Gradually, the law simplified and categorized these holdings by developing a system of estates. eventually the judges recognized only 3 types of freehold estates and 3 types of leasehold estates. Lord and tenant had to fit with it into one of these 6 categories, although some variations within the category were permitted. The common law developed 3 estates, each indicating the period of time for which the land might be held in terms of a freehold interest in land. The first one is a fee simple. A fee simple is an estate that has the potential of enduring forever. It is created, for illustration, by O, the owner granting the land to A and his heirs. This estate resembles absolute ownership, and the holder of a fee simple is commonly called the owner of the land. And the second form is a fee tail. A fee tail is an estate that has the potential of enduring forever, but will necessarily cease if and when the first fee tail tenant has no linear descendants to succeed him in possession. A fee tail is created by, for example, O granting the property to A and the heirs of his body. We have the word his body, so it implies the linear success. A direct related is personal. The third form is life estate. Life estate is an estate that will end necessary at the death of a person. It is created by granting the property to A for life. And there are also 3 types of leasehold estate. Leasehold estates include estates that endure for any fixed calendar period or any period of time computable by the calendar. And from period to period until the landlord or tenant gives notice to terminate at the end of the period. And this is called a periodic tenancy. The first form is called a term of years. And the last form in a leasehold estate called a tenants at will. This is created by the description for so long as both the landlord and tenant desire. The fee simple, fee tail, and life estate are freehold estates. Freehold was the highest form of holding under feudal tenure. The leasehold interests are not freehold because in the early feudal system, they were not considered to be estates at all, but merely personal contracts. The important difference between a freehold and non-freehold estates is that a freeholder in possession has season, whereas a leaseholder has only a possession. What is season? A season was an important concept in feudal time and remains important in understanding how the estate system developed. A person is seized if he holds an estate or freehold and either has possession of the land or a tenant or possession from him, except where the land is leased and the landlord holds the season. Possession by a freeholder embodies the fundamental idea of season. In the feudal system, the overlord collected feudal services and instance from the person seized of land. To perpetuate the feudal system and keep wealth flowing to the top of the ladder, some person always had to be responsible for the services. Hence, the rule was there could never be an abeyance of citizen. In order to convey a freehold estate, the party had to go on the land and perform a ceremony known as Library of Citizen. This involved the grantor and grantee going on the land, and the grantor, before witnesses, delivering citizen to the grantee by some symbolic act, such as handing over cloth or tree. This visual ritual was important in society in which a few could read and write. It attested the change of ownership in the clearest possible way. It is one of a primitive form to express his will to transfer a land. We can find a similar instance in Korean context about the customary law. Estates are created by using appropriate words in a deed or will. Words of limitation in an instrument describe what type of estate is created. Words of purchase identify the person in whom the estate is created. Suppose that O convey Black Acre by deed to A and his heirs. The words to A are words of purchase. The words and heirs are words of limitation, indicating a fee simple. Every estate can be classified as a possessory estate or as a future interest. A possessory estate gives the holder the right to immediate possession. In contrast, a future interest does not entitle the owner to present possession, but it will or may become a possessory estate in the future. A future interest is, like a possessory estate, an existing thing. The fact that it is non-possessory does not preclude it from being treated as in existence. It is a thing waiting to become possessory. The law of estates developed at a time when land was the only property of substantial value, and is sometimes called the law of estates in land. The courts began to apply the system of estates to personal property. Because of the feudal origins of estates, there is technically a fee simple only in land. The correlative estate in personal property is absolute ownership. However, a fee simple in land and absolute ownership of personal property are functional equivalents. Absolute ownership, like the fee simple, can be divided into smaller possessory estates, followed by future interest. Generally, the same types of possessory estates and future estates can be created in personal property as can be created in real property. At common law, estates were ranked according to their potential duration. A fee simple was longer in potential duration than a fee tail, which was longer than a life estate. All freehold estates were presumed to be longer in duration than a leasehold. The only estates permissible are the fee simple, the fee tail, and the life estate, and the leasehold estates. New types cannot be created. So it is corroborating with the dealings normally found in a continental Europe. But the difference lies in judge-made law, distinct from a courtal dealings. If an attempt is made to create a new type of estate, the language of the creating instrument will be construed to create an estate without one of the existing categories. we now consider the freehold estates. There is a fee simple absolute. A fee simple absolute is of potentially infinite duration. There are no limitations on its inheritability. It cannot be divested, nor will it end upon the happening of any event. Therefore, we call it absolute. A fee simple, like all estates, is created by an instrument using a words. A common law, it was necessary to use the technical words and his heirs to create a fee simple by D. To A and his heirs, for example, created a fee simple. The words and his heirs are only words of limitation, indicating that A takes the fee simple. O, owner in fee simple conveys to A in fee simple. A common O, A takes only a life estate. To create a fee simple, O should have conveyed with the words to A and his heirs. In early feudal times, the tenant held the land only for his life, and the lord could dispose of the land as he pleased after the tenant's death. Through time, the tenants received the following additional rights, which includes inheritability, alienability, and divisability. Tenants forced bargained for the inheritability of their holdings. The law would send in advance to accept tenants' heirs on the tenant's death by granting the land to A and his heirs. The words and his heirs are thus called words of inheritance. If the words and his heirs were omitted, the law had not sent it to inheritance, and the land was not inheritable. A had only a life estate. Prior to the statute quia emptors, land could be alienated during life only with the consent of the law, who had a strong interest in making sure the succeeding tenant was not his enemy. Quia emptors gave tenants the right to alienate their holdings without the law's consent. Land was not divisible at law until 1540, when the Statute of Wills was enacted. At the time, the fee simple took on the three characteristics today associated with it. It is freely alienable by the owner during life. It can be disposed of at death by the owner's will. And if not disposed of by will, it will pass to the owner's heirs. The words and his heirs were never necessary to create a fee simple by will. Any words indicating the estate intended to divide the fee simple would do. For instance, a will dividing property to A, my entire estate, or to A in fee simple is sufficient to convey the entire fee simple. The requirement of the words and his heirs has been abolished in almost all states. Under modern law, either deed or will is presumed to pass the largest estate the grantor or testator own. The conveyance to A conveys a fee simple if the grantor had a fee simple. The word and his heirs are still used frequently to create a fee simple. A couple of states, South Carolina and perhaps Maine, still require the words and his heirs to be used in creating a fee simple by they. In other states, the issue may not be clearly settled, and the title to land may be uncertain where the words have been omitted. As we learned, the words in a deed or will are normally critical to dispose the property rights of land. That is, of course, due to its nature of exclusiveness, dispositiveness, and needs of uniformity and generalization, and a commonality notion. In the case titled Cole vs. Styloff, decided in 1957 in Connecticut. The court held a deed must contain the words "as" in order to leave the record free from reasonable doubt as to its validity in conveying a title. Inheritability is one of essential characteristics in fee simple. Therefore, the law has to be read in combination with the law of intestate succession. There are ancient forms of a succession law from English tradition. For example, the limited right of a spouse and ancestors. And the Asian law also put a stress on the blood related to negate the right of a stepchildren. Some very concept about the collateral relatives. There also is some of a conceptual distinction such as divide, legality, and next of kin and others. If the owner of fee simple dies intestate, the fee simple is inherited by the owner's heirs. The word heirs means the law, those persons who succeed to the real property of an intestate descendant under the statute of intestate succession of the applicable estate. Thus, if all dies leaving husband and child, and under the intestate succession law, the husband and child succeed to title to all's land. All's heirs are all's husband and child. In English common law, a spouse could not be an heir. He or she was given only a cottage or dower in real property. If the decedent left no blood relatives, the land is treated to the overall or the crown, subject to the spouse, a dower or cottage. This disqualification of the spouse as an heir has been abolished in all states. If the decedent leaves no blood kin in all states, the spouse will succeed to title, even in states that have retained dower and cottage. In most states, dower and cottage have been abolished, and the spouse is given a fractional share as heir of the decedent. The modern form of intestate succession would be very close to current form of Korean succession law. If the decedent leaves issue, parents do not take. If the decedent leaves the spouse and no issue, parents take 1/2 and the spouse 1/2. If the decedent leaves no spouse and no issue, parents take everything. An adopted child is treated as a child of the adoptive parents and not as a child of a natural parent under the common law. But stepchildren do not take, except for the spouse. Only blood relatives of the descendant take as heirs. For the collateral relatives, there is a rule of ancestral property. A common law property passing to collaterals went only to those who were of the blood of the first purchaser. This meant generally that the collateral had to be related by blood to the ancestor from whom the property came. Thus, if all died owning property, which all had inherited from his mother, only all's innate collaterals could inherit property. If all left two surviving aunts, his mother's sister and his father's sister, all's mother's sister took property. The doctrine of an ancestral property has been abolished in most states. And there is a distinction between device and legalities. Common law made a separate definition between those two concepts. If a decedent leaves a will, the persons who are devised land are called devices. The person who are bequeathed personal property are called legatives. The difference between heirs on the one hand and devices and legatives on the other hand is that heirs take when decedent leaves no will. Devices and legatives take on the will. The second form of a freehold estate is a life estate. A life estate is an estate that has the potential duration of one or more human lives. Life estates are very common today, particularly life estates in trust. When property is held by X in trust for A for life, A is entitled to all the rents and profits or other income accruing from the property. The usual life estate is measured by the grantee's life. So for illustration, O conveys a property to A for life. The grantee A gets an estate in the land for as long as A lives. Upon his death, the land reverts to O, the grantor. So let me call the class to end at this point of time, and we will devote our time to the types of a freehold estates in the next class. And after, we may facilitate the rest of a real property law by limiting the discussion to the essence of essence of rules, including a recording statute and the law of deed and some context of a leasehold's legal terms. So that will be all for this class, and see you in the next class.